July 23rd, 2024. As we have quorum, I'll call the meeting to order. The time is 11 a.m. As usual, I'd like to start the meeting off in a good way by acknowledging the city of Maple Ridge carried out its business under traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Madam Clerk, did you have anything you wanted to add? No? Okay, good. We're gonna move forward. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Youssef, second by Councillor Carreras. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of June 25th, 2024? Moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Doze. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor, motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And we're going to move on to the next item. 5.1 Maple Ridge Climate Action Plan update. And who do we have with us today to join us?
Good morning, Mayor and members of the council. So this is the update on the climate action plan that has been underway since January. As you know, it's a major component of the critical path of reducing their community and corporate greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate change, and protecting our natural environment as identified by yourselves under the strategic priority of climate leadership and environmental stewardship. To present the update for your information, we have Robin Hawker, who is with Introba, the project manager lead, and also online answering questions in terms of the greenhouse gas inventory component of the work is Stuart Somerville, also with Introba.
Sorry?
About introductions
Oh. Okay, introduction.
of us.
Oh, okay,
Well, we don't know each other.
go ahead. Start with you.
Told you I was gonna tell them, didn't
It's like you're throwing me a curveball.
Judy had doing city council a week, so that's separate games.
I'm Sunny, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Back this way, Corleen Careers.
Scott, city manager.
Dan Rooney, Mayor.
When you got to do the council.
I'm Yusuf, I'm one of the counselors, and Sunny and I sit on the board for the Climate Hub in Ridge as well. I have a vested interest in hearing what you have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you for the intros. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to meet you all and to know you all by name. So as Brian introduced, my name is Robin Hawker. She, her pronouns, and I'm the project manager for this work, and I lead the climate risk and resilience practice at Introba. So we're a green buildings firm that supports climate ready building design, all the way from actually designing buildings, but all the way up to informing local government policy as well as provincial policy and federal policy. So we can have that full ecosystem of climate planning. So I am so privileged today to speak to you all about the progress that's been made on the Climate Action Planning Initiative. As I've mentioned a couple times, I've honestly been a little bit floored by how passionate and organized and committed staff have been on this file. We really feel so supported as a consulting team, and so I'm really excited to share with you the outcomes from the work that staff have been leading so far.
Thank you.
All right, so a little bit about our consulting team. You'll notice that there's quite a lot of faces on that slide, and that's because this particular scope of work is really holistic, more holistic than we've seen from other climate action plans that communities are leading. And so recognizing all of the interconnected pieces in this work, we brought together different consulting firms and specialists to support each and every one of those elements. And I'll share a little bit about how all of that is woven together. So the Introba team, our role is managing the project and weaving together all of the outcomes from analysis into a cohesive and implementable climate action plan. Liquor Geospatial are recognized mapping specialists across Western Canada, and they are leading the development of land use forecast maps, climate risk maps, as well as extreme heat maps. And they also led the greenhouse gas inventory work, which I'll be sharing a bit more detail on today. Sarah Gillett is with Mycelium Consulting, and she has been working with the Maple Ridge communications team and planning team to support the engagement that's been being led for this project. And then Camille Lefrancois is with Diamond Head Consulting, and they have been working with Maple Ridge on the urban forest management strategy, which I understand you'll be hearing a little bit more about this evening. And we just feel really privileged to have her creating a bridge between that initiative and the interlinkages with climate action planning. So a bit about the project at a 10,000 foot view. So as you all know, climate change is increasingly becoming more of a top priority among communities across Canada. This is due to global recognition about the role we play in emissions and contributing to climate change, and a real drive to reduce the emissions and contribute to the solution, not the problem. And then also at the same time, recognizing that increasingly across British Columbia, and I know in the Lower Mainland, communities have been experiencing impacts from climate change already, including, the heat dome that was felt, increasing wildfire events and smoke related to that, as well as major flood events. So developing this climate action plan honestly couldn't come at a better time. We are now seeing, we, the public, are seeing the value of climate action planning because it's affecting our lives. And so that is a key driver for this work. And not only is there the driver of the need for climate action planning, but there is also a driver of opportunity. The Maple Ridge staff have been able to leverage multiple provincial and federal grants or provincial grants to support this work to make the climate action process more cost efficient and enable us to put effort in to make sure that it is really impactful for the city. And not only will the work that comes out of this project inform climate action planning, but it also will have all sorts of cascading resources that can be used for other policy and planning projects, such as the OCP update. And so what is a climate action plan? So from our perspective, at its core, a climate action plan is a public-facing policy document that tracks a course for a more climate-ready Maple Ridge. So typically climate action plans are graphical documents that are engaging, that members of the public want to read and understand, so that they can understand what does climate change mean for them, what is the context here in Maple Ridge, what are the city's goals and priorities for action, and that those goals and priorities are really informed by robust analysis and results from engagement. And then those goals drive towards really clearly defined actions that the city plans to take over the short and medium and long term to address climate priorities. Another key element in climate action plans that we think is important for success is making sure that members of the public and different actors within Maple Ridge can also see themselves in the plan and understand the role that they play in supporting the community's goals for emissions reduction and risk reduction. So it's not just here's what the city is going to do, but it's here's what the city is going to do, and this is how you can support us and support your own families and households. And then it's important that a climate action plan has a clear pathway for tracking success and sharing out on outcomes. So some drivers for success, I've sort of already gone over a couple of these, but it's important from our perspective that a climate action plan is focused on the highest impact and most cost-efficient approaches to manage the greatest needs, that it reflects community and council priorities, that it is founded on robust analysis and meaningful engagement, and that the actions identified are realistic and implementable, that it's not a laundry list or a wish list, but it's really what the city can and will implement over the coming years. Another element we're seeing increasingly and we think is really important is that the action plan is founded on a strength-based approach, which really means that rather than recreating the wheel or recommending all sorts of new things you can add to the robust list of programs you already have in Maple Ridge, it's recognizing what are you already doing and how can actions in this plan build on and supplement those ongoing initiatives. And how can you leverage partnerships to ensure sort of a more regional and cohesive approach to emissions reduction and risk management. And then, of course, it's important that it's supported by the public, that the public feels that they've been involved throughout the process and that they can see themselves in the actions and solutions moving forward.
Sorry. Oh, no worries. Go ahead.
Thanks. So this climate action plan is essentially two plans woven together. The plan takes a low carbon resilience approach, which means that it not only charts a path towards emissions reduction, which we consider mitigation, climate mitigation, but it also weaves into that strategies to manage and mitigate risks. So not only is Maple Ridge through this plan finding ways to reduce contributions to climate change, but you're also planning to respond and manage the outcomes from climate change that are already being experienced. So this concept of low carbon resilience is really about not only addressing both side by side, but also finding a way that the mitigation actions you implement are low risk, and the risk management strategies you prioritize are low emissions, so that there's that intersect between the actions. And then this is I would say one of the key elements for success that we've seen in the climate action planning processes we've led with other communities, which is the plan really needs to be centered in the sphere of control of the local government. So, it's easy to put together a wish list of all of the things that you'd like to see changed, but if the city doesn't have the authority to actually implement that, it's not worth focusing effort and investment on. So what we do when we put action plans together is we focus on what are the actions within your sphere of control, and what are the areas where you can be supporting initiatives led by other levels of government. So sphere of influence could include, say, advocacy actions or implementing incentives to support those initiatives by other governments. Or a sphere of interest could reflect actions that involve doing more research or trying to understand what else is happening at the broader scale. So in terms of this project, as I mentioned, this is a very uniquely holistic scope of work that we responded to in the RFP. And it's one of the reasons we were so excited to do this project and to work with the city. So the project involves, of course, data collection, setting a robust understanding of what you already have in place at the city, what your greenhouse gas emissions are, what policies you have in place, and how climate change has already been impacting you. So that was what we focused on in the earlier part of this year. The next piece was starting to bring in really robust spatial analysis to inform the planning process. And building this spatial analysis in at the ground level is something, again, that is unique from what we've seen across other local governments. And I really deeply believe will set you up for more effective and more implementable solutions. So this land use forecasting piece is really about understanding, based on population projections and development projections, where is it likely that growth will happen? And how does that influence the way you plan to respond to that growth in terms of an emissions and risk reduction perspective? That piece, that fundamental piece, then feeds into the two tracks. So remember, we talked about the emissions reduction, that's kind of the top track there, and then the risk management, that's the bottom track. So the land use forecasting helps inform what emissions are happening in the city to date, and where are they happening, and where are they expected to happen in the future based on growth. And then the land use forecasting also influences more robust mapping about, where are people going to be and where are hazards expected to be, and where's the intersect between that. Once we finish the inventory and mapping, the mapping is in draft right now, the inventory is essentially complete. Then each of those leads into the analysis component of this work. So our greenhouse gas team, Stuart will share an overview, is now working on taking the greenhouse gas inventory outcomes to understand what are the key levers that you can pull on to further reduce emissions within the community and within corporate operations. So that's understanding those highest areas of impact to then inform the action planning. And then on the risk management side of things, understanding where are people and where are hazards likely to be, where are those top spatial priority areas, and then what are the broader ways that those hazards could impact people, infrastructure, and natural environments, and that's the risk assessment piece. And then from that, those two elements weave together into the holistic climate action plan and really reflects engagement at each stage along the way. And I would be remiss if I didn't really lift up the work that Maple Ridge staff have been doing and really leading this project. Staff have played a pivotal role in defining the methodology, commenting on draft analysis results, and they will continue to play a key role in identifying action opportunities. So you can see here that we have established an advisory committee, which is made up of the core project team, who you can see here at the table, as well as representatives from community planning, parks planning and development, fire operations, and engineering. And then in addition to those folks who have been attending advisory committee meetings, we've also been inviting other staff from key departments to attend those meetings as well as needed to share their knowledge and expertise to inform this process. So this is the project timeline. As Brian mentioned, we started working together in early this year in January. The first half of this year has really been around that foundational analysis to inform planning. And we're now getting close to this transition period where we're taking the outcomes from analysis and thinking about how should that drive actions. So that's why we're here today, to share with you some of the initial outcomes from analysis, introduce the project, and really set the foundation for us to come back to speak with you all in October, where we will share the final outcomes from analysis as a platform to get your thoughts on what are the key opportunities and priorities for action. So we'll plan on having that follow-up meeting in October, and then we'll go away, we'll take your guidance, we'll do that second round of engagement. We'll put together a more comprehensive list of action opportunities and talk to staff about what implementation could look like. And then we'll come back to you early next year to share the draft climate action plan for your feedback before we finalize it. And this is what we've accomplished so far in this sort of first half of the project. So the first phase of engagement has been carried out and is wrapping up. The mapping is almost complete. We have draft maps that we will be sharing out with staff at our next advisory committee meeting next week. The greenhouse gas inventory draft is complete and target setting is underway. We'll bring that back to you in October. And then the risk and vulnerability assessment is in draft, and we'll be doing a deep dive with staff on that at our workshop next week. All right, so a bit of an overview on the engagement process. This engagement, so Sarah Gillett has been working with the Maple Ridge Communications and Planning team on this, but I have to say that it really has been driven in large part by Maple Ridge Communications. The plan here is essentially to lead 3 phases of engagement. The first is to go out to the public to understand, what does climate change mean for you today? How is it impacting you? How has it impacted you? What are you most concerned about? And what are you already doing in your homes and in your household and your community to reduce emissions and manage your risk? The outcomes from that first phase, which is now wrapped up, are then directly fed into the risk assessment, the mapping, and the greenhouse gas modeling. The next phase will be to go back to the public once we have some ideas of broad themes for action, to go back to them and say, these are the general ideas that we have and the priorities we've identified from this analysis for action. We want to hear from you how this aligns with your priorities, where you see yourself supporting these actions, and how you think, and what your thoughts are on how different actions may have trade-offs with other actions and other priorities that members of the public might have. Then we'll take that input, feed that into the climate action plan, draft the climate action plan, share that back with you, and then go back out to the public to close the loop and share how their input directly influenced the plan. And I mentioned that the Maple Ridge Communications team has really been driving this work. I have loved seeing the innovation and creativity that the communications team has used to put this content in front of people where they are. So going to community events like farmers markets and Pride in the Park, I think has been a key driver for why we have had such a wonderful response rate so far. You can see how many participants and respondents we've heard from. And we've used a cross section. So not only have we gone to people where they are, but we've also done an online survey with different groups to gather input from folks in a more accessible way. And we're just right now processing all of the input that we've heard from people and incorporating that into our assessment. And we'll be able to share back on what we heard at our next meeting together. All right, and with that, I will hand it over to Stuart to speak a bit on the greenhouse gas inventory.
Amazing, thank you, Robin. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Could you move on to the next slide, please? So, as Robin said, I'm going to be presenting on current community GHG emissions in Maple Ridge. This is work that Liquid Geospatial have carried out. I should introduce myself and say I'm Stuart Somerville and I'm part of the Introba team, but this particular piece of the work was done by Liquid Geospatial. So Maple Ridge is committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. That's the existing goals that you folks have. And that includes 45% reduction by 2030. So this is in relation to community GHG emissions. Up until now, as I understand it, the city has been quite good at tracking corporate emissions, and I think there's going to be an update on corporate emissions, 2023 corporate emissions coming this fall. But this is the first real deep dive into community GHG emissions. So we're interested in understanding what are the current emissions, and then, as Robin said, we'll get on later in the project to forecasting emissions and how existing and planned actions from the federal government, the provincial government, Metro Vancouver, and then also Maple Ridge's actions affect those emissions. Maple Ridge play a crucial role in implementing regulations that come from those higher levels of government and supporting people and businesses to meet those regulations. So without municipal action, the potential emissions reduction from those regulations may not be realised. So they have a crucial supporting role, but then they also have a role in trying to close any gap in the remaining emissions and identifying opportunities to reduce emissions further. But I will focus on current GHG emissions first. So Robin, if you could go to the next slide, please. So when we talk about emissions, we tend to talk about Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1 emissions are those from sources located within the city boundary. And then Scope 2 are emissions that occur from grid-supplied electricity or heat or steam that's coming into the city and used within buildings or vehicles, etc. And then Scope 3 are all those other GHG emissions that occur outside of the city boundary, but as a result of activities that take place within the city boundary. So whether this is waste that is taken and processed outside of the city, or again, transportation that starts in the city but moves outside of the city. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of the inventory itself, the community GHG inventory, you can see on the screen now a table breaking down the different sectors and subsectors of emissions. So the inventory process follows the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is a worldwide recognized protocol for doing GHG inventories. So this inventory has been aligned with that protocol. And generally speaking, Scope 3, those emissions that occur outside of the city boundary aren't accounted for in this inventory for many reasons. One being that it's really hard to get that data, and two is they're occurring outside of the city boundary, and there tends to be a focus on what's happening within the city boundary. So you can see here the three key areas are stationary energy, and this relates to energy use that's happening at a given site. So by this we generally mean buildings. Then transportation, so looking at on-road transportation, then railways and other forms of transportation, and then waste. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So this is a very high-level summary of emissions in 2010, which was the city's baseline year, and 2022, which is the latest inventory that Liquid Geospatial have just completed. I should point out that we're showing emissions here for stationary energy, transportation and waste at a very high level, but the analysis does go deeper into each of those sectors, and we do have full breakdowns of emissions in the different subsectors. So what's key to point out here is that emissions have increased slightly over that time, up by 12% from 2010. And so the emissions reduction targets that the city currently have are relative to 2010. But they haven't increased as quickly as population growth. So population growth has increased by 29% during that time. In terms of what that means for the different sectors, transportation has increased the most over that time, whilst waste emissions have dropped. So you can see in that table in the bottom right-hand side how emissions have changed in each sector. So up 6% in stationary energy, so buildings, manufacturing, etc. Up by 19% in transportation sector, and down by 24% in the waste sector. Could I have the next slide, please? So this just concludes what I've been speaking to, that although emissions have been rising over time, they're rising slower than population growth. There is a big opportunity for emissions reduction in both the building sector and the on-road transportation sector. The majority of emissions there are Scope 1 emissions, so that's generally from fuel combustion. So there is a big opportunity for electrification in those sectors. Just to identify limitations, there are some uncertainties in the emission estimates for smaller sectors. However, since these sectors contribute less to the total emissions, the overall certainty of the inventory is fairly high. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So that was all around current emissions, and as Robin has said, the next stages of our analysis are going to be around forecasting. It's particularly on the GHG side. So if I could have the next slide, please. So that first bit of analysis that was done by Liquid Geospatial, the land use forecasting, this will support the development of the climate action plan, and the outputs of this analysis will feed both into the GHG emission projections and the risk assessment. So land use forecasting helps us understand how and where a community will grow. It informs projections of emissions in terms of growth and like the number of people and vehicles there may be and houses. And it can also be used to target policy and programs, knowing like where the community is going to grow. The Liquid Geospatial team is currently refining these projections to ensure they align with the housing needs assessment that has been done by the city. The next slide. And then for the emission, so as we said, that land use forecasting will feed into the emissions reduction modelling. So we are modelling these projections for Maple Ridge's community emissions, and the projections are based on policies that will be coming from higher levels of government, so those that are already in place or will be coming, that we expect will come into place. This analysis is also currently underway and will be presenting the final results at the next council meeting. And we are working with the Maple Ridge team to identify the potential local actions that will reduce emissions further. The purpose of this analysis and this modelling is to identify a set of realistic but impactful actions that the city can take to reduce emissions further, and to identify whether or not the city is on track to meet their existing targets and whether there needs to be any consideration to revising those targets. So I guess all of this to say is that we're in the process of conducting a lot of analysis. Some of that is complete and some of that is ongoing. And the intent is to make sure that the decision making for climate action planning is backed with data. We can go on to the next slide, please. Robin, I believe I'll hand it back to you here.
Great, thanks, Stuart. So just a snapshot of some of the other analysis that's underway. So Liquor Geospatial has been leading a number of different hazard maps. This one that you can see on this slide is what we call a land surface temperature map. It really shows what areas of the city were found to be hottest during a point in time event. So the event that they're using here is the heat dome event. And this is developed using satellite imagery and information. And it also speaks to sort of the land type topography in terms of where is there more pavement, where is there more park, where are there open water bodies. And so this is just one example of the maps that will be produced as part of this work and will inform the risk assessment and ultimately the action planning process. So other maps you can expect to see are extreme temperature risk maps, which overlay not only where it's hottest, but also where there may be higher vulnerability, either due to the aging condition of buildings that may be more vulnerable to extreme heat, or the demographics and economic dimensions of populations, recognizing that certain groups may be more vulnerable to extreme heat and hazards than others. Other maps include multi-hazard maps that show that you recently released Metro Vancouver data to show where flood risks might be highest, where wildfire risk may be highest, and where air quality may be most significantly impacted during wildfire events. And so all of that will inform the risk assessment process. And so we'll be sharing those draft maps with staff next week and then share those back with you all in October. And then, as I mentioned, this all informs the semi-qualitative risk or semi-quantitative risk and vulnerability assessment, which takes the spatial information and translates that into a list of potential action or impact statements that describe how each hazard, which you can see on the screen, we're looking at 9 different hazards, how each of those 9 hazards could impact different systems within the city. So how infrastructure could be impacted, human health and safety, natural environment, etc. So we are currently working on that assessment. The outcome from that will be a prioritized list of impacts, which will then help identify which impacts and risks should be priorities for action, and that will inform the action planning process. And then the next stage of engagement will be to share those high-level concepts around action planning for broader public feedback, to then feed that back into the more detailed action planning process led by staff. And this is our timeline for next steps. So we have our meeting next week with staff on mapping and risk. We'll then have another meeting with staff in late September to share back some initial thoughts on realistic resilience strategies. And then that's the point where we will then meet with you all again to share those initial strategies for your feedback with the analytical outcomes as a foundation to inform that discussion. And then we'll share out with the public and then start working on the draft action plan, which we'll then share out with you in early next year. So that's everything for me. Thanks everyone for your attention. Happy to address any questions you have.
Well, that's quite a bit of information to absorb. Thank you very much for the work that you have done, and thank you to staff for going the extra mile to get this done. It's quite clear to see that the recommendations from the Mayor's Task Force on Climate Action, how they are feeding into the overall roadmap. And we knew it was going to take some time to get the roadmap done. We didn't want to waste any time. So some of the stuff that are within our circle of influence is actually really starting to come front and center. I also sit on the Metro Climate Action Committee, and the one thing that just drives me nuts is you put people in a room and you get all these technical people. And we forget that the public themselves, we're not bringing them along with us. And we have to, if we're gonna get buy-in from people. So I like all the engagement that we're planning to do. I think we need to do even more than that, and that is, if we don't do that. We're just gonna get back to the same old, one side says this, the other side says that, and there's no middle ground here. So I think we need to own that story of what climate action is, what our climate action roadmap will do for us. And as we continue to move forward, I know that you will continue to focus on that aspect of it. Maple Ridge it does have a lot of passionate people when it comes to climate and the environment, and you know, they're in groups. In their passion, it doesn't always communicate to the rest of the public. And so as we continue to move forward, that is something that I hope that we can continue to do. So I'm gonna stop right there and open up the floor for questions or comments from council. Councilor Youssef.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I echo your words of gratitude to both staff and to the consulting team. I very much enjoyed the breakdown of the success drivers that you had on there. That was really well put together. I really do appreciate, as the mayor alluded to, the areas of control, the influence and the interest that we have, because of course we need to ultimately be able to achieve what we can achieve. I have a question about, you have on the slide of success drivers, no regret actions. Tell me more about that.
I'm glad you asked that question because I didn't have any time to go over it. So what we mean by that, so that's a concept within Simon Fraser University's low carbon resilience approach. And it really speaks to this concept of co-benefits. So not only do you want to identify actions that are within your sphere of control, but wherever possible, if you can identify actions that address multiple needs, so that could be multiple climate needs. So picking an action that addresses lower emissions and risk, maybe it addresses risk from multiple different hazards. Or you can also think about actions that address climate needs and other community priorities. So things like improving aesthetic, you know, using nature-based approaches that enhance ecological health, create a more enjoyable place for people to spend time. So that is how we harness co-benefits. And the concept of no regrets is really that if you select actions that have multiple benefits, there's no regrets. Even if the climate hazard that you designed that action to address never manifests, and we all hope they never manifest, even if it doesn't, you haven't wasted money. You've spent money in an area where there will be other benefits to the community that they can realize even if the hazard does not manifest. So that's the concept of no regrets and leveraging co-benefits.
Thank you, it's wonderful, and that's timely because we were just recently discussing the tree canopy coverage in our municipality, and we were talking about the urban biodiversity and introducing pollinator-friendly plants, and as it would now come to be no regret actions. I very much appreciate that. Hopefully I'll have some no regret actions in my life as well. On the GHG reduction goals, couple of questions, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair. Are we on track to meet our 2030 and our 2050 goals is one, and are milestones as we're moving forward from now, having had a look behind the curtain, if you will, are they achievable?
So I'll speak to that question. So with the analysis, what we've identified is there remains a gap. And that's the intent of the climate action plan, is to identify the methods that we can bridge the gap between our planned actions, the actions that are planned by other levels of government, and where that gets us in 2030 and 2050. So that's our baseline. So the question is, how aggressive do we want to be on bridging that gap? What are the ramifications? And how do we actually coordinate an approach where we can advance multiple different areas to actually get us to the targets that we want to achieve? The other aspect is that, as was addressed by Stuart earlier, there's a question about targets. What we did was we adopted both regional and provincial targets for GHG emissions. Those targets are based on gross, so they are a number that's grounded in a 2010 baseline. Let's say we want to reduce by X amount. What it doesn't consider is how do emissions evolve in a rapidly growing community, and what are the factors you need to consider. So from that lens, there's a discussion that needs to be had as to how do we actually build targets that are reflective of the fact that we are making progress as a community. We are reducing our impact on the environment, on greenhouse gas emissions as we grow. For example, when we looked at the population statistic, we have grown at a much more rapid pace than our GHG emissions. In my mind, that indicates that we are progressing in a positive manner. We're doing the right things to maintain a trajectory that is not increasing proportion. So we need to build targets that reflect those actions, and perhaps it's complementary pieces that enable us to track our progress in a different kind of way. But that's a conversation that we're actually going to facilitate later on in this process.
I agree with you that our growth in population has not been reflected in our GHG emissions, so that's definitely a good place to be, excuse me. Lastly, on the point of electrification, and this goes back to, again, our areas of control and our areas of influence and interest. While we can do what we are able to do, such as electrifying most of our fleet vehicles, if not all of them, making sure that our buildings and civic facilities are efficient. There are challenges on capacity when it comes to the grid, reliability even of that grid, be it exposure to fires, windstorms, droughts, flooding, and other unpredictable conditions that we're meeting. My question would be, how are we still going to try to meet those targets while at the same time factoring that in and realizing that we have that small sphere of influence and control? That will be my last question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I didn't see you had water, but.
Apparently I can't get enough water in it.
I can address this. I don't know, Stuart, if you had anything you wanted to speak to at a higher level on the electrification side of things.
I'll let you go first and I'll add on anything else.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the piece that I can speak to is just how do you find the alignment between the electrification and risk management? And there are many different strategies that are currently being explored by communities and at the policy scale. So one concept that we talk about often is this concept of passive survivability, which is thinking about how can we retrofit buildings, design buildings, arm households with the resources that they need to operate in their homes during a power outage. So that often involves using passive first approaches. So not only installing air conditioning or heat pumps for electrification, but also thinking about how can we encourage homeowners to install fans or open their windows in the way that will help get good airflow. So their electrification does not need to be a barrier to addressing climate risks. They can happen. Electrification can absolutely happen in a way that complements risk management as well.
My drive is I don't want us to try to get so far ahead of ourselves that we end up falling over our own swords by going toward electrification while ultimately one day, hopefully it never materializes, we're unable to perform those services or provide the general public with the services that the city needs to be carrying out.
Totally, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other? Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and just need to express my deep gratitude to our very hardworking staff who, from the very beginning of the Mayor's Task Force on Climate Action, have just dived into this big piece of work, and it's just great to see it moving ahead. The community engagement is, to me, that is like one of the biggest opportunities of this whole work. You know, I think for those of us who've been working in climate space for a while, it's, you know, you can deal with corporate emissions and you can deal, you know, you've got advocates working, but it is engaging the public that is key to success. I love the phased approach to the community engagement where we're going down a path together. And I know I've seen staff at community events talking to different folks. Can I ask a little bit like what you guys are hearing from people? Obviously different people have different stories, but I'd just love to hear a little bit about what people are thinking.
Did you want to speak to that a little bit, Brian?
I can't speak to that, through you, Mayor, to Councilor Schiller. So what we've heard, this is a tidbit, we are doing a what we heard document with you at the end of this month to the public of what we heard. Most respondents, 80% of the respondents are interested in climate change. They actually feel there is a municipal role for climate action, that they need to support what we're doing with the province and federal. Their most highest concerns are poor air quality, extreme heat events, wildfires, and drought. So a lot of what we're seeing and experiencing currently this summer is definitely on the radar. And I also think it's also from events even from 2021. It's still in the back of the mind of like, am I prepared? What are we doing? Are we there? Things that we look at in terms of impacts, definitely from an economic point of view, they're looking at loss of productivity, loss of mobility, impacts to their income, property damage. So these are some of the things that people have actually said to us in the survey to go, these are my high things that I'm concerned about. Socially, definitely health, mental health is very high on that. Also changes to their daily activities and recreation. And then the feelings of isolation. So even if an event happens, they feel like in an apartment complex, for example, they don't know their neighbors enough. And they feel like, how do I know what's going on out there? If I need to be taken, if emergency happens, how do people find me that I can get out there and feel safe? And then environmental, definitely there's the concept of loss of ecosystem services and supports, impacts to vegetation and a lot of gardens. So people that are very passionate about gardening are seeing the changes happening in their gardening. And then there's also a concern about lack of water supply. So they are concerned about, you know, where are we going to get their water from? Because I think they are hearing in the broader nuances that there are areas that in the drought situation are losing access to water. Their early thoughts on climate action. So we asked a couple questions, right? What are you currently doing in terms of reducing your emissions as well as adapting to the changes and dealing with the risk? So high reductions strategies, a lot of people are very passionate about composting and recycling, which I think is very, as you can see in the reductions that have happened in waste, a lot of people have gotten that education, that learning. I think they're very familiar with, they're taking action on that way. Number of respondents have been reusing products and reducing their consumption. So for example, in our community, having the repair cafes have been very successful. I've seen at a lot of events, a lot of people in the community are bringing toasters, computers, and they're getting repaired on site. So they're not being felt like I have to go out and buy something. The resiliency strategies commonly is using, if they have access to it, they're using a cooling system. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a heat pump or air conditioning. They are talking about being access to public pools, to finding shade. Although there is concerns that there isn't enough shade in parks that they're saying, they'd like to see more shade trees or some structures that can provide shade. Accessing to a cooling space. So we do have some cooling centers, but I think access to cooling space also can include such things as our faith-based organizations and our community centers. And then changing their water use. So when they get the notifications around, hey, there's a drought situation, please change your water use. A number of people are saying they respond to that as well, looking at okay, I don't want everybody to run out of water and I'm concerned about my own water flow. But because we are getting that messaging out to them, there's been a lot of early adoptions around that. And then the other resiliency strategy that everyone has been getting from, especially from BC Emergency Response, is the carry and go grab bag, which is very common messaging around emergency responses. They're like, yeah, I have one. Although people are concerned that maybe they don't have the right stuff, or they also have to remember where they placed it, because when they get the call, it's somewhere in a closet and it should be forefront by the front door. The barriers they're finding is mostly So I'm gonna go deeper dive on that one, because that was one of our key responses we got from a number of people. We really wanted to get this plan to be not just what are you doing, but like help us acknowledge what barriers you're facing to see what we can control and influence on that one. So give me a moment, because it's a very deep document. So some of the resiliency strategies they're looking at is some of the barriers they want is like more access to cooling spaces. So sometimes they feel that there's barriers going to a pool, and they'd like to have more access to more pools. They are looking at, how do I keep in place? So common other things is some of it for our renters, definitely still a lack of control because they're not the main tenant. So they would like to do stuff, but because they are not the landlord, they feel like because there's no cost savings around that, it's very difficult for them to have that discussion with the landlords to say, can you put in a heat pump or an air conditioning unit? Can we have some cooling space? Even an awning would work. Lack of information about some of the services and resources still, there's still public people that are like, well, what should I be doing, really? And embedding it into from how does this embed into what I do every day in my life? Not just the, okay, here's the common messaging, I get that, but I can't do that. Some people are still finding there's a lack of access to emergency response facilities, so a clear air center, more cooling centers. This is more about specifically in the neighborhoods themselves, as opposed to how can I, from a mobility barrier, how can I go from where I am to where our main cooling center is? A lot of people are still finding they don't know that there might be an access point, whether it's through a taxi or but it shows services that can bring people to those. Definitely more concerns around, I think we've heard this definitely from a transportation point of view, right? That they definitely want more pedestrian, bike, active transportation modes of transportation to respond. As well as the lack of shade. So as I said that before, lack of street trees, people are feeling there still needs more street trees. I feel that's coming up in the urban forestry management strategy tonight. And then lack of funding programs. So some people are still looking for those better grants or understanding of grants of how they can look at furnaces and natural gas removal, going towards electrification, frustration at the lack of coordination between federal, provincial, and some Metro Vancouver grants. It seems to be like you can enter that window of I'd like to do this, but the windows of opportunity may not overlap really well, and there may not be opportunities for staffing funding. And then largely other people like, again, lack of sometimes the composting, they're finding there's a lack of it, but I think this is more multi-residential places as opposed to individual single dwelling facilities. But that is just that's a sample.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. No, that's great. And it's really, I think we're seeing the conversation evolve, right? And maybe 10 years ago, people were not like tying climate action to their day-to-day lives the way that they are now. And that's a great moment to be at. I love the maps because I think as well, everyone can look at the map and be like, oh, where's my house? And that it means something to people. I have all the confidence in the world in the way this plan is being developed, so I don't have a lot else to add. And I acknowledge we said we were going to talk about targets later, but just remind me, so we have community targets. Do we have specific corporate targets established?
We've used the community targets as a proxy for our corporate targets. So we are tracking along the same targets.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilor Schiller. Councilor Perez, did you? No. Councilor Dewey, okay. Any other further comments? No, well then I'll leave one comment. I think it's very telling that the heat map that you showed us. The further out you go with the tree canopy and the foresting, you can clearly see there's a difference in heat. But when you come to the downtown core, there's a problem down there because there's not a lot that you can shade yourself with. So that is something that we need to continue to work on. So thank you very much for your presentation. Looking forward to the next steps and go from there. So can I get a motion for receiving this as information? Please? Moved by Councilor Schiller, seconded by Councilor Carreras. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to move on to the next item, and just so you know, we do have lunch coming in, so we have time to continue doing what we're doing. Thank you, guys. Moving on to item 5.2, 2025 business planning guidelines.
Sorry, translate. Has it a hard cutoff or?
Yeah.
TransLink has a hard cut off.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if we want them to come
Okay, Dan, you're staying with us for a bit.
Yes, I am. Good, it remains morning, Mayor and Council. But today we'll be talking about the 2025 business planning guidelines, and really the purpose of our discussion today is to start getting some direction on how we're gonna move forward with building out the 2025 through 2029 financial plan. And the reason why we're having this discussion at this point is because the earlier on in the process, we can get clarity on the direction we're going, the better supported staff are in actually building a plan that meets council's expectations and objectives, pardon me. So let's just ground ourselves in what the cycle looks like, because there's some components that council may not be aware of. So for example, this is a continuous process. This happens year round and it covers 1 year to the next. This current process has already started to some degree with the city conducting the citizen survey. So this is a statistically representative survey of the community that actually sources a sense of where we are in terms of our service levels and service expectations from the public, as well as their evaluation of our performance relative to the importance of those services. I'll be bringing forward a report at the beginning of September, actually providing you with all of the results of the citizen survey. But the citizen survey in itself, along with the guidelines we're talking about today, are the basis for staff to go out and understand what the public desires and the framework from council to build out the 2025 to 2029 financial plan and the business planning and the business plans for the city. So after today, staff will take all this information away and build out the business plans and prepare through the summer and into the early fall. And what we'll do is, based on these two pieces of information with staff begin building, we'll conduct a budget survey, which is a bit of a different approach than what we undertook last year. What we're going to do is ground truth the combination of council's direction as well as what we heard in citizen survey in a more tangible manner for the public in terms of what's being proposed and what we're developing. We'll then be bringing forward department presentations in October, a bit of a third quarter update of what's happened to date, what are some successes and what are some challenges that staff are facing, departments are facing, looking forward to 2025. After that, we'll be following up with a budget presentation and then deliberations late in the year from November to December. So we're working through the dates at this point in time, but we'll have those out very shortly. And throughout this process, although we have two distinct points of engagement with the community through surveys, we actually receive feedback anytime through our budget email address and through phone calls to the city. So we're continually hearing from staff, from the public, pardon me, as to what's top of mind for them as it relates to the financial plan and business planning in general. And we blend this into the process before we adopt the financial plan. So that would be presented to council late in the year or early next year with the intent that an adopted financial plan enables us to best leverage the market when going out for capital projects. So we're able to get projects done during the construction season, but also we optimize our pricing. And then as we turn our minds through to the middle of the year, we're required to actually adopt our tax rate bylaw by May 15th. And usually what we do is we amend the financial plan with the information that's gathered after the end of the year, after year end's completed, to provide a comprehensive financial picture for council moving forward. So this is a process that was undertaken in a kind of a single event earlier this year for council. So just as, again, to ground us, right now, we're just trying to discuss the business plan guidelines, which will help staff to go out and build out the business plan. So what are the guidelines? Essentially, what they are the directions and the framework that staff will use to build out the financial plans and the business plans. And it exists kind of at two different fronts. There's the business planning component of the guidelines, which ensure alignment with council's strategic plan, the objectives and key results, but just broader strategic alignment with plans that have been adopted to date. So for example, the urban forest management strategy, which council is considering, that's going to tie in as well to the overall strategic framework. The additional piece is we identify some of the key assumptions that are built into the plan. So you'll note that in the attachment, the financial plan's assumed growth is 1.5%. That gets built into the financial plan. Additionally, we have included the proposed, or pardon me, the tax increases that were adopted in the last financial plan for 2024 through 2028 as our starting point. We've also identified some key mechanisms for council to consider changes to service levels. And we're renaming through our business planning process review. We've identified the need to rename our incremental packages to decision packages. It's just a bit more nuanced, but it's intended to create clarity around the process. And so you'll see that as we track forward in business planning as well. We've also identified some timing for key deliverables. But that's really just the framework that staff will utilize for building out the financial plan. So as I mentioned, part of the guidelines is the tax increases that were adopted as part of the 2024 through 2028 financial plan. So I will note that there was an error in your attachment in the report for 2024. That's been amended here on the slide to reflect what was actually adopted. So I just will orient you very briefly. So the general purpose tax increase was the 4.75%. We have that additional line for fire and police additional staffing. So those are the larger scale incremental requests that were considered during the last cycle and approved by council. The cost for those increases was spread over 3 years, and that was presented during business planning to smooth some of the rate increase over a couple of cycles. You'll see that carries forward to 2025 and 2026. I'll give you a brief overview of what each of these components entails. So the general purpose component is really our cost of doing business. It ensures that we're able to continue to provide the same level of service tomorrow that we're providing today. One of the questions that we do get is, why does this differ from kind of CPI or that traditional basket of goods? And the simple answer, and Mr. Thompson can probably provide a much more in-depth answer, but the response is that our basket of goods looks a little bit different than what the traditional consumer actually procures. So there is a bit of variability, but we also have additional inflationary pressures such as labor increases, some of our contract renewals, our utilities vary. So there's a number of different factors that fall into the general purpose tax increase. I will note, however, though, when the public gets their tax notice, the general purpose as well as those police and fire increases were bundled under a single number. I've just expanded them just for clarity for the purpose of this discussion. So as I mentioned, there are a few items that are actually impacting the general purpose increase this coming cycle. And so we have some contract renewals both on the labor front as well as our contracted services for RCMP services, e-com services, which is our emergency communications, and then some of our operating agreements that we have in place. And these are just a sample of some of the cost pressures that we are seeing that are impacting that general purpose rate. As we move on, just a reminder that these are the tax increases and those were actually adopted in the last planning cycle. Onto the infrastructure replacement, this particular line item supports the replacement of our existing capital. So it really enables us as staff to manage our existing assets to the tune of over $1 billion worth of assets. So I know Mr. Thompson would say that there's a long road to get to where we need to be in terms of funding the replacement of all of our assets, but we're on that pathway. And ensuring that this funding is allocated on an annual basis ensures that we maintain on the same trajectory to getting to that destination. The last piece I'm going to speak to is the Parks and Recreation line item. So this was implemented for the implementation of the prior Parks and Recreation and Culture Master Plan. I want to differentiate that because what it covers off is some of the operating costs related to the fourth ice sheet and so it does not actually capture any forecasted costs for new infrastructure. So with the conversation of a new aquatic facility is separate from this particular line item. So that leads us to the 2025 adopted tax increase of 6.3%. So that budget, that amount of funding actually provides us with a bit of that funding envelope to be able to move forward and planning at a department level as well, because that sets the total available amount of funding for the organization to actually allocate. So what we're proposing as part of these guidelines is building a framework around maintaining existing service levels. And so when I talk about the general purpose increase, actually being there to maintain service levels and to do what we're doing today into the future, that's what we're talking about right there. At the same time, we built in a methodology internally for evaluating our services to ensure that we are actually optimizing how we're delivering them. And so there's a bit of rigor on the back end at a staff level to understand, are we best positioned to provide a service? Are there other partners who can provide it as efficiently, as effectively as we can? All of those questions are built into our service evaluation on an annual basis. Additionally, we have a decision point, and those are our decision packages. So where a service level is increased or we want to introduce a new service, that's presented in the form of a decision package for council and discussed during the business plan. And finally, I should note that service level increases, so those are the decision packages, those are above that 6.3% that we're currently proposing. So while we are trying and work through finding efficiencies in how we deliver services, there is an understanding that due to cost pressures, we do need to consider that additional service enhancements will push us beyond the 6.3% at this point. So our next steps are for staff to take away the guidelines and the direction from council right now, and then start building out the financial plan. We'll return to cover off this 2024 citizen survey results, conduct a budget survey with the public, conduct our department presentations in October, go through our fulsome business planning process with council in November and December, and with the anticipated delivery of a financial plan adopted early in the new year. So there's a lot of information there, but I'm happy to answer any questions of clarity.
Thank you, Dan, for your presentation. I know the first round that we did in that first year, we had some challenges of, how we wanted to see this. Last year was a lot better in the presentation and how we were able to respond to it. I know that the upcoming one, there's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of really going back and sharpening the pencils. We have to be mindful of the public dollars, obviously, but we have to find the right balance. I mean, when we see what happened in Calgary with a water main that was supposed to last 100 years and blows up after 50 years, and the chaos that is created, there is a precedent out there that if we don't take care of our infrastructure, and we have over $1 billion of infrastructure, it will come back and haunt us in the long run. So, I'll let council ask their question, but I think it's so important to find balance of that while maintaining, being mindful of the dollar amounts for the public, and being able to explain everything that we do. Thank you. That's good, correct.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I always look forward to business planning and the budgets. Can you go back to the cycle slide? Yeah, that one. Okay, there's a couple of questions. The citizen survey, if you can just tell me when that's going out again?
Since it went out,
It's out, okay.
it's closed. We are now going to report results in September.
Okay, and when we send it out, do we review and update it, modernize it every time it goes out, or just stay static?
So this iteration has stayed consistent with our previous iteration. So what we do is this high level statistically representative survey. But then when we look at specific initiatives, we consult on those initiatives and get more information. At a service level, as we're moving forward with our customer experience framework, that's going to set a different tone for how we evaluate our services. So it's going to necessitate us revisiting the format and the structure of our citizen survey, because we want to make sure it's reflective of how we're introducing customer service and how we measure it. Yeah.
I just want to make sure it's being modernized and looked at when we do it, because otherwise the information coming back to us may not be really current to what we're doing. So the one thing I've talked about it before, I love budget cycles. I love seeing circles like this. And I know you talked about it, but I do think it's missing from this particular circle. And if you're going to use it as we go forward, it's something that we're reflecting on and staff are reflecting on. I think it's really important that we actually put in there the strategic plan that council has, because budget is tied to strategic planning. I know that we have updates. We have an update later today on our strategic plan, and I think it's important to weave that into the circle as well, so that we know and the community knows that the budgeting process is based on the strategic plan that council has put together and did have public consultation as it went around. So the April-May piece where you said the amendment, so essentially the biggest decisions are being done in November, December, and then when it comes back in May is just sort of tweaking the decisions that we made in the fall based on the actual results of the current budget.
And any additional updates and decisions that may have happened, anything to add on that front?
Just with respect to the capital carry forwards, so including projects that are still underway for the prior year.
Okay, so, but so the capital is where we could have the most movement, but essentially that May is tweaking of what the decisions would be, okay? And then can we talk a little bit about the public consultation, and when we go out for public consultation, are we being clear as to what exactly their influence or having impact on, and that the decision is still rests with council? Are we very clear on that piece?
In this process in particular, we will be very clear on that, particularly because we're doing a lot of engagement upfront. So we're providing council with the information to make an informed decision. And so we'll communicate that throughout the budget survey process.
Okay, great, thanks. Because I think it is helpful for everyone if we're just very clear what they're doing and where the decision lies. And then on the sort of base operational budget that comes to us, this time around, I'll just say, I would like to get a little more information on that base budget that's coming to us, instead of saying, hey, to maintain, this is what it costs to maintain. I need some more information based on department, what that looks like. And my hope is, and I know the mayor alluded to it, my hope is that within your business plan preparation and your department, leading up to your department presentations, that that you're able to talk to council and explain to council where you sort of look for those internal savings, so that our budget increases are really the true budget increases that are necessary, and not just because we think it is. Like it, just put it sort of in, in just sort of casual terms, like I want to make sure that we are looking underneath the cushions for the dollars. And so if we're going out to the community and saying we need some more of your money to do these things, I also want to be able to tell them that we have done our due diligence internally and we have found any internal savings that we can, and anything that's redundant or duplicate, like we're actually getting rid of that and reassessing what we're doing. And then I think, oh, and the other thing that is really helpful for me, and I'm still sort of struggling with the municipal cycle because it feels very different from every other organization I've been a part of, is, and I think you did allude to it in your conversation, is there needs to be, as we go into the start of this process, it's important for us to have it updated to where we are currently. So we make these decisions, when you do a budget, it's your best case scenario. We hope this is what we're going to need and what it's going to look like. But at some point, in particular, usually the halfway point, there's a, hey, this is what actually happened so far. This is what we think the rest of the year is going to look like. And then going into budget planning, it's really helpful for us to know what did those decisions look like on an actual dollar. So I'm really hoping that at the beginning of this, we can have an updated tweak of the budget. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will be getting an update on the budget in September.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it's important to the fact that staff are listening to what we're looking for. And it's important to recognize that. And each year we're getting better and better at it, and helps us make better decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else? Councillor Schiller, followed by Councillor Youssef.
Thank you. I'm definitely very supportive of the direction that this whole project, this piece of work is going in. The breakdown how we get to the total 6.3 number, and here's the general increase, and thank you. Yeah, that one, it is really helpful, and you mentioned that on the tax notices, it's not broken down like this, and I'm wondering if it's possible that it could be broken down like this.
I can raise that with our taxation department. So it is broken down with infrastructure replacement and parks and recreation. It was just the additional line item for fire and police additional staffing. That's
Okay.
the one component that was added, but that's something I can raise with our tax department for discussion.
Yeah, I think it is helpful. I think when people look at a 6% increase, that feels high. I think when, you know what I mean, there's sort of an emotional reaction to some of these things when you know that part of it is for fire and police, you know, I just think it is helpful. And then just the other thing too, is sort of echoing some of what Councillor Ferris had said, like, I hear these stories of efficiencies and how, you know, we looked at this and realized, oh, we could do this in a more effective way. But I think we could do more to let the public know about that, right? And not just during business planning, but at other times in the year, like, let's just look for the opportunities to share those stories and just let people know the work that is being done to contain costs. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the work that's gone into this. When I saw the sentence at the end that says service level increases extend beyond approved tax increase, that scares me a little. Not only because of the implication of the possible increases on top of the numbers that we're already seeing, and then of course, keeping in mind that the last citizen survey, not the current one that you're yet to review the results of, was, I believe, a 7-to-1 ratio that people were in opposition to the 6.5 increase, and we're looking at more than 3% increase. So as some of my colleagues have mentioned, I'd like to see how much weight is given to that public input. Of course, we're not going to touch so much the 1.3 or the 0.8% in 2025. It's the 3.85 that I'd be looking at in building those efficiencies within our general purpose taxation to bring down that number something closer to where the public are. And that raises the next question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. Are those numbers of, as you said, the approved financial plan for the next 4 years, are those numbers adjustable, or are they, for lack of a better word, now set in stone?
So I will look to Mr. Thompson, but there is latitude. The financial plan is, we are required to adopt a 5-year financial plan.
Mhm.
There is always less certainty at the back end of the financial plan than there is at the front end. So we have greater control and influence over the initial years. But as I would point to the fire and police staffing increases, decisions made today do have ramifications and ripple effects for future years and across the financial plan. So while we can identify, so as we go through our discussions, it's something to bear in mind. But there is, as we look through our operational efficiencies, the question always comes up about trade-offs and whether one increase is as important as another increase, and how we can actually optimize our available funding to do the things that we want to do and we need to do, while also balancing out where we no longer have as great of a need. So that's redirecting and redeploying resources to the areas of optimal use, but also of direct and immediate.
Thank you, and I, going back to that sentence that got my spidey senses tingling, I would hope that our approach and philosophy will not only be looking at service level increases, but also service level improvements, so that we can utilize the tax base that we have existing in a much better way, and possibly going forward be able to justify an increase through an improvement in service. As many people have said, if you're going to increase my taxes by 6.5%, are you going to provide me with 6.5 faster service or 6.5 better service? So I hope that improvement is also something that we have in our minds as we're going forward, rather than just increases. And lastly, through you, Mr. Chair, just a quick question on today. We're approving the guidelines. These numbers are already set. I recall voting against the budget earlier. So today I'm not approving a 6.3% tax increase for 2025. I'm approving the guidelines by which we will proceed with business planning, correct?
Yes, as well as when we look at our starting, yes.
Short answer, I don't, short answer, thank you, Mr. Chair, that was it.
Thank you very much. Important to remember that two of the labor unions that we deal with have been resolved. We have contracts and those are included in those numbers there. So that's a great start to go from. Councillor Duick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to start, I think we all agree that the more information we can provide on the taxes, the actual tax notice, the better, so that people understand what general purpose means, right? And when you see it broken out, it does help you understand. I totally concur with being able to give our rationale as to every department looked at, and yes, it falls under the general purpose. But you know, we reviewed and maybe there is some tweaks, maybe there's not, but at least we can share that we did a fulsome review. We continue to need X number of staff members in this department and this is why, and things like that. Because then it really helps us be advocates for why. As far as the 5-year, yes, we always adopt the 5-year plan, but every year there is the ability to adjust it, and this year is a prime example of that. We adjusted it up, so for good reason, police and fire. I've always been a strong advocate for the infrastructure replacement. Since we started this many years ago, it's been like this depending on who was around the table, and Trevor is nodding. I have been consistent on this. We can't juggle with that number, in my humble opinion, because otherwise we will be like Calgary. So this is critical, we keep that and maintain it. You know, because you take 2% off or 0.2 or 0.4, we have to make up for it. And we're never going to achieve what we need if we keep juggling with that. So I will continue to be an advocate for keeping the infrastructure replacement, because cities like Montreal is a classic example of they never projected for the future, and with such old aging infrastructure. And when you look at their overpasses, you look at their roads, you drive on their roads, they're horrible. And I don't mean any disrespect, but there's a number of factors in that. They don't have the money to replace it, and then of course the weather. So, but because of that, you know, they should be forecasting that. So that's where we have that ability, and we should. I like, you know, the approach. I think, you know, it's important that we reach out to the public and really listen to what they're saying and what are their priorities. And I appreciate you outlining Parks and Rec as well, because we have a whole body of work that falls outside of this that we have to decide how it is we're going to deal with that. Is that going to be part of a future increases, or is that going to be a separate entity? What does that look like? We don't know yet. Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, if we look all over North America, everybody is dealing with aging infrastructure problems, and you can see it in the States. It's getting bad. So we need to be up on top of that. So any further comments? Yes. Well, sorry. Sorry.
Because I'm the second speaker.
Yes.
Just quickly to say that she has already taken care of the general purpose that I was going to ask a question on, because I needed to see what was kind of related to that. But I wanted to also add the fact that Park and Recs have been something we all agreed within this group that we need to do some work on, especially when it comes to operational standards and stuff like that. I think it would be more appropriate to have a bit of that, because that is where we are going to be by next year. And it's also part of the infrastructure facility we're talking about. So that when we break it down and people know where we are going, we begin to allocate resources to them, it just wouldn't be, oh, we didn't know this, because you asked us to build a new swimming pool, and now this is what it's going to cost to have that. So I think it will be better also if we do to Park and Recs what we plan to do to change our purpose. That's breaking it down and making sure that we highlighted some of the things that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Just quickly, on the package underneath operating budget, departments will identify external funding opportunities from other levels of government and the private sector. Anytime I see finding money from other levels of government, I'm always gonna highlight it. Please look hard. Find whatever you can, any grant. It just helps us achieve what we need to achieve with less pressure on the citizens. Can you just talk a little bit what private sector funding? What would that look like?
There are private donors, the fund, there's for example, we've sourced funding from the Bullet Foundation, which has enabled us to do some environmental initiatives. So that would be an example of a private donor, where they actually make funding available to local governments, but also nonprofits to undertake sustainability type work.
Okay, and then like places like UBCM and FCM fall under other levels of government?
They're primarily funded through the province, so yes.
Okay, perfect, thanks. And then the other thing is fees and charges will be reviewed and increased where applicable. I know that there's a fee chart that comes to us, I think, annually for review.
So we're working towards consolidating all of the fees and charges. In September, you'll actually see a couple of different departmental fees and charges come forward for addition to that bylaw, but also with an update. So by 2025, we'll have the fees consolidated, all of our fees updated with a nice rhythm and sequence of updates so that it can be done on a more consistent basis.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to that. And I know the last budget round, we talked about looking at some equitable fees, especially in parks and recreation. So I will be looking forward to making sure that we have access for financial access for those who need it the most in our community when that comes to us. So thank you. That's all for me. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further comments or questions, can I get a motion to receive, please? Moved by Councillor Dose, seconded by Councillor Schiller. Oh, it's not to receive, it's to be approved. Sorry.
Yeah.
Motion to approve the guidelines. Again, moved by Councillor Dose, seconded by Councillor Schiller. Any further comments? All those in favor? Motion was carried. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, Dan, for clearing that up for us.
No problem.
Okay, we're gonna move on to 5.3. 45, okay. When we have a base TransLink 130 starts at 130. Okay, so we're gonna keep going till participatory budget pilot project.
Hey, well, good afternoon, Rumi and members of council. So I will be, talking today about the participatory budgeting pilot project. I just want to mention that initially, Laura Benson was going to present this, and so we were going to have as part of our team today, Dan do his presentation, Brian and Laura. Unfortunately, Laura can't be here today, really unfortunately, but she's done a ton of work on this. So I just wanted to really just call the fact that I'm presenting on her behalf, and the work that you'll see today really was through Laura. Okay, so we're going to go through several sections today, and I don't know why this thing's really on its own. Okay, so we'll go through several sections today. We're going to talk a little bit about participatory budgeting and what it is. Then we'll look at what a typical participatory budgeting process looks like. We've looked at a lot of other communities, and we'll start to see some of the trade-offs between the decisions that get made in participatory budgeting as we look at a framework. Then we'll look at some specific examples from some of the communities and the decisions that they've made. And finally, we'll have a discussion with council about your priorities and what you think this program and what the framework should look like. That information will allow staff to then go back and come back to you. I think this thing's moving on its own. My apologies, I'm just gonna go back. And it will allow staff to come back with a full framework for you. So starting off with, what is participatory budgeting? So just a reminder for council, this is a democratic and inclusive approach to allocating public funds. Really, it empowers citizens to directly influence how some of this budget is spent. It's also potential to give voice to some of those non-traditional participants when it's designed in such a way where you consider folks that may not typically be part of the budgeting process. So as a reminder for council, why are we looking at participatory budgeting at all? Well, first of all, this aligns strongly with council's priority for engaged, healthy community. And it really allows the public direct input into how resources or a portion of the resources are allocated. Also, it's one of council's objectives and key results, OKRs. And so for that reason, we're back here talking about it. And since it's one of those OKRs, just as a reminder, council approved this through the latest financial plan, and the council wanted the community to have a say in spending a portion of this year's budget in the amount of $100,000. So the goals for today. We wanted to provide you, members of council, with an overview of what participatory budgeting process looks like. We will also present program options for your consideration by looking at examples and decisions that other communities have made. We will then seek council's feedback regarding 3 foundational questions, which are how a project idea is generated, what types of projects will be considered, and ultimately who votes. When we have that information, we can take that back and go and develop a full program for council's consideration, bring it back to you, and we'll bring that back through a future committee of the whole meeting. So let's take a look at what a typical process looks like. Laura had looked at quite a few other communities, what their process looks like. So the first one is the design of the program itself. This is what we're here talking about today. What does participatory budgeting look like? The next one is generating ideas. Who generates the ideas? Is it staff? Is it the public? Is it non-for-profits? Is it a committee? Is it a steering group? Who ultimately generates those ideas? Who then takes those ideas and turns them into proposals? Right? So who takes an idea and looks at how much it will cost, what are the risks, how long it'll take to implement, and actually create proposals that can then be evaluated for implementation. The next piece is voting and funding. So who ultimately makes the decision? Is it the public directly? Is it all members of the public? Does it include businesses? Does it not? Again, is it a committee? Is it council? Who ultimately makes the decision? Then there is the implementation. Who implements the projects? Are we looking at projects that only the city implements? Is it non-for-profits that implements them? Is it individuals in the community? So all of those phases have a decision to be made regarding how inclusive and how participatory each of those phases are. And there are trade-offs. When you make a decision in one piece, it changes one of the other pieces. And so that's really what the program design comes down to, looking at how participatory each of those phases we want to be in. And ultimately, when all of this is done, because it's a pilot project, we will then take all of the feedback that we learned through the pilot and put that back into a future design should council decide that it wants to maintain participatory budgeting beyond just the pilot project. So this is just a quick illustration or example of the fact that what participatory budgeting does, it's a choice that decreases the city's influence over a portion of the budget while increasing the level of influence that the community has for those funds. And so not only is the decision in developing a program around where in those 5 phases the participatory piece comes in, but also how participatory. According to the IAP2 spectrum, you could look at each of those phases and decide that you want to be just at the inform phase or all the way through to empower. So for example, when making the decision ultimately on selecting a project, is the selection of the project open to any project that was voted, that was put forward? Or do citizens have a list of 3 or 5 projects that they can vote on? That's a different level on the IEP2 spectrum. And so those are some of the decisions we'll have to come back to council with after we've heard your feedback on these 3 foundational questions that we're going to ask about today. Okay, so we'll go through a couple of examples. We're going to start with these names that Laura had come up with, just so it's easy to reference. The first one is called Science Fair. This is where the city provided a venue, invited community groups to come up with proposals and showcase their proposals at this venue. The public were then invited to come to listen to these proposals, peruse the booths, and ultimately at that same venue, vote and make a decision. The city played no part in prioritizing or selecting the project. The important thing to consider at the bottom there is this particular project looks at these 3 dimensions of program duration, the cost to administer it, and how inclusive or participatory it was. Clearly, this one would not cost a lot. It would not take a lot of time to implement. It was 1 day, it was booths, and the city didn't have any role in evaluating the projects. On the other hand, it wasn't very inclusive. People had to show up to the event in person. They had to vote on that day. The individuals did not have an opportunity to put forward their own ideas. It was through non-for-profit organizations. So you can start to see that this one, there's some correlation between program duration, cost to administer, and level of inclusivity. So the second one was called Stewards and Delegates. And this one is, the steering committee one. So in this example, this is where council in some cities would establish a committee to design a program, and then they would implement that program. For this to work, dedicated volunteers would need to spend a lot of time going through each of the applications, turning ideas into concrete proposals, and then also coordinating a public outreach. Like the previous example, the city plays no role in the decision-making under a steering committee model. The city that uses this model sometimes provides what they call equity supports because there's so much engagement from the public on these committees. They provide support with whether it's transportation or daycare. So there's a little bit more cost to administer this. But we can see on the bottom that a project like this or a model like this took more city time because staff needed to support the committee. There was a little bit more cost because of these equity supports as well as staff time. But there was also a lot more inclusivity because the steering committee was made up of members of the public. The last model here that we will look at, and it's by no means comprehensive, there are potentially hundreds of models out here. We just wanted to call out a few for you. It's called Stewards and Delegates. So this is very similar to the steering committee model that we just saw. The difference is there's more roles for the public. Instead of there just being one committee, here there was a steering committee, but there were also roles called budget delegates. These were individuals that worked as liaison between the committee and the community. There were also subject matter experts from the community that would come in and help transform some of the ideas into concrete proposals. And there was also community-wide balloting that was used to select the project. This project, from what Laura had told me, the one project she looked at took about 8 months to deliver. So a lot of staff time, a lot of cost associated with staffing resources, but also very inclusive because not only was there a committee made up of members of the public, but the members of the public could also be budget delegates. They could also come in as subject matter experts and ultimately voting. So with this slide, we put it all together for you to be able to start to see the connection between the level of inclusivity, the cost to the city, and the duration. So as you can see, typically, the more inclusive you want to be in each of those 5 phases we talked about, the more time staff will need to put into it, the more cost will be associated with it. So the city of Maple Ridge can choose one of those models or can, and very likely will choose a bit of a hybrid model. But really to get to this the decision of what a model would look like, We want to go through 3 foundational questions, which will give us the guardrails or the outline of what council is comfortable with. We will then go away and fill in all of those details, all of the questions about how will voting be done? Are there conditions under what types of projects can be put forward? Are there selection criteria? We will do all that work and then we'll bring it back to council for your consideration. So before we move on, just a quick question. I guess it's an opportunity for council to just take a break and think about, with everything you've seen today and heard about participatory budgeting, the costs, the benefits, the opportunities, but also the potential outcomes. Is this still a direction that council is in support of? As a reminder, it was $100,000 that was allocated. Is this still a direction? And I'm not saying that because staff is not. It's a check-in with council that this is still a direction that you support going forward with. I'm presuming that it is, and I'm prepared for that, but I wanted to give council that opportunity to have that discussion, recognizing that the more inclusive we are, the more engagement there will be from staff, potentially hundreds of hours. So I wanted to put that forward as an opportunity for council to have that quick touch point before we move forward.
Thank you very much for that, although I don't know it'd be quick because I'm seeing some confused faces, including my own, as to what exactly it is that we're doing with this. I'm gonna stop there and I'm just gonna open it up for council. Councilor Duick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, you know, during business planning, of course, I recognized that this was the direction we were going, but I think from my perspective, it was about involving the public sooner than later. This is too complicated to me. I do not support staff spending hundreds of hours and spending this kind of money to get public feedback that we will then be criticized for because we're going to continue on a direction. Because that'll be the critique. Council's going to continue to do what council's doing based on all of the information we've received. So why did you bother to include me? I'm just being totally honest on that. That's my impression. So I would rather take this money and put it somewhere else where we could really use it. It's not to say we shouldn't include the public, of course we should, but the criticism we always get is you wait too long before you ask us our opinion. So sharing the information that council gets to look at is what I envision the public having a chance to weigh in on. Here's where we're proposing, this is what council's looking at. What are your thoughts on these particular, if there's incremental increases or what it is? Plain and simple, what we get, they get. This is too much work for staff, it's too complicated.
Thank you, Councilor Carreras.
Councilor Youssef.
I didn't see your hand go up. Did your hand go up? Okay, go first then.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Curtis. Yeah, I share Councilor Duick's concerns. When we were talking about the spectrum of involvement, I'm all for collaboration, but of course it has to be within reason. My biggest fear right now within City Hall, and Mr. Hartman may be able to correct me on this or otherwise, is do we have the staff capacity to be able to be so engaging with the public at this point? And when you mentioned that it's not typically part of the budget process, yeah, it's not for the reasons that not only do we have to meet certain timelines and deadlines, but also because we are here in our seats as a result of public input and the public trusting us to carry forward with that responsibility. It raised a question in my mind when you were talking about the going out to the public and engaging them as to whether we're going to be going out to the general public and opening it up as some of our surveys are widely available, or is this going to be a focus group type of setting? And of course, if we do that, then you will get the criticism that certain segments of the population were not represented, that you're listening to certain individuals and certain groups and not others. So yeah, for me, it's about capacity, it's about the mechanisms of it. I agree with Councillor Dewick that getting the information out there first and foremost and letting the public, if you will, percolate on it and see what the projects that are being generated and the ideas that are coming forward to look into them, and possibly having at that point even some opportunity for the public to share with staff what projects they would like to see come forward, rather than stipulating or stating that this is where we want and then providing the direction, because ultimately that takes away from staff's role as well as council's role when we're meant to lead the community. The types of projects that are to be considered, again, a collaborative approach. Here's what we're thinking of, what are your thoughts on it? Survey type of engagement, and then who can vote on it, that would be, that's council's, that's council's purview. So I hope that provides you with enough feedback as to where I stand on this, and thank you for the work that you've done, as well as Ms. Benson. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carreras.
I am very confused on what this is and what we're being asked to do. What I'm hearing and what I'm reading is quite different than what I thought it was during the budget programming or the budget planning we did last year. Under E, interdepartmental, I'm trying to figure out what it is you're asking of us. So the pilot project will resolve the allocation of 100,000 to one or more projects that have not been identified yet. So what is the $100,000 for?
So let me try go back to the process, maybe this will help. Hopefully this thing won't change by itself. So
Like I get this piece, like I get.
right, so
This.
so within this piece, the most participatory piece would be you ask everyone in Maple Ridge who's a resident, what projects would you like? Then staff
Like project of anything or project within $100,000?
within $100,000.
So this is quite different than, okay.
Yes,
So
it's
we're
all,
only
it's
talking $100,000 that the public can tell us how we want to spend.
right, and that's the design piece that we're talking about. We could be talking about 1,000 projects, 100 projects of $1,000, or it could be one project of 100,000.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
so that's the program design that I'm talking about.
Okay, so when it came to me in business planning, I thought it was about how we're doing our consultation processes for the budget or any of our engage that we're doing in the community. So this is specifically about, we're gonna give the community $100,000 and they figure out how to spend it. Okay, so here's where my concerns are. First of all,
Oh, sorry.
I love the Empower Collaborate. I'm a huge fan of the Empower Collaboration, Involve, Consult, Inform, and I was more familiar with the RACI one, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Like it's the same thing. Basically, it's very clear on what people are doing. And that's what I was talking about in the budget. It's very clear, and I think it's important that anything we do, we go out to the public, we're like, look, we're telling you what's happening, or we're working with you to create something. We're involving, we're consulting you, we're informed. Like, I think those are important pieces, that the decision, the responsibility lays with council on these pieces. It's our legal responsibility on some of these things. Where I do have some concerns, so first of all, let me try and do this so it actually makes sense. There's a lot of jumble of words here. I love the idea of saying to the community, there's $100,000, how do you want us to do it? What my concerns are is $100,000 isn't gonna get us very far, so we're not giving them a lot of money to even do anything. And also I'm concerned about the amount of hours it's going to take to create and to administer and to give out $100,000, and I'm concerned about the staff hours. In particular, right now, there's just a lot on everybody's plates. There's been a lot of change, and we've had a lot of new staff joining us, and so I really want to just really focus in on what those key priorities are in the community. When it comes to the actual participatory budgeting process, where I think we need to be very, very clear is the influence versus decision, and where I'm a little concerned that this gets muddy is when the selected projects are carried out with ongoing oversight by citizens and government officials. and that the public will vote on what they want. So it makes me feel a little bit better that we're just talking about $100,000 in projects that people are saying, is they're just working with this, and it's not like they're voting on our decisions, because that's
Yeah.
that's not their legal responsibility. So, yeah. Do I like the idea? Do I love these pieces? Yes. Am I concerned that this is not the right time to be doing this? We have so many other things on our plate, and we have some real financial constraints within the community. I'm just not so sure that this is where we need to go forward at this time. Thank you.
Councilor Schiller.
Okay, well, I love this idea. And I also get the gut check about the time and the money when we get right down to it. But I will just say that, some of these concerns that have been raised about the pushback that we might get, that, oh, well, you just asked me for my idea, but then you just decide what you want anyway, or I'm not able to participate, this isn't for me. Like, this is an opportunity to actually address some of those concerns, right? People feel like sometimes we have a survey and I'll hear from people like, oh, but you just asked me which of those 3 choices I like better. You didn't ask me what my choice is. It's like, do you see an opportunity here to say, for this piece, you guys get to decide, and I think that is very empowering. I think what I was sort of thinking as you were talking about this is I think there could be a way to do this where the city provided a certain structure that ideas would have to be generated within. For me, I would definitely want to see the public generate their ideas and share them. Staff would evaluate them for sort of practicality purposes and sort of what is within our sphere of control. And then we could put it back out to the public to vote on. I think it's a very cool and innovative idea. I wonder if there is a way of doing it that is just scaled back, you know what I mean? Like, I think about the science fair idea, and can we do a little pilot, but it's not $100,000, it's $20,000. Can we sort of see where that puts us? Because I guess at the end of the day, I like the idea, but I also understand the concerns that are being raised.
Any further comments?
Yeah, just a quick one anyways. I think what I'm seeing here is I'm concerned about the possibility of our spending $200,000 by way of staffing to deliver $100,000 project. In other words, it doesn't really kind of justify that kind of expenditure to do what we're planning to do. Is this a very good approach to budgeting? Fantastic, yes it is. Is it going to eliminate the possibility of people complaining that you didn't ask me this, or you asked me that, you did what you wanted? Definitely not. It will not remove that problem. So for me, I think that the time now is not auspicious for us to start spending that kind of money on this kind of thing. Can we look at it in the future? I would say yes, but given what we have to do between now and when the budget is due, I don't see the feasibility, especially with the cost aspect of it. So for me, I guess we possibly will have to give it a thought by extending it by next to future budgets, and then see how possible it's going to be to either start it early and then move it into the system and see how it works. But for now, I don't think it's feasible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'll just throw in my 2 comments. I love the initiative. I don't think we're at that point. We still have a lot more work to do at City Hall, with our processes and procedures, and we need our key staff focused on the thing that will make a huge difference with the planning and engineering departments, stuff that will allow us to actually move forward. So that's my challenge there right now. I don't think it's the right timing for that. So I'll leave it at that. Seeing no further comments, their recommendation up there.
Well, so
Oh,
we were going to go through how far down the path you want to go. So the first question was, who would generate project ideas? Is it all of the public, or would you create a
Mr. Hart.
committee? Oh, sorry.
Mr. Hart.
Thank you. Given the discussion around council, perhaps a motion on the floor, your worship, suggesting that this item be pulled from council's work plan and that we revisit this in future years as time and resources.
So moved.
Move this seconded.
Who are you seconding? Is he moving it, you seconding or who? Okay,
I can't move any.
I know, that's what.
No, it's like big, so-
Okay.
You move mountains, come on. Okay, so the motion is to remove it from workshop at this time.
Sorry, council's on the.
Work plan, yeah, work plan.
Yeah.
Any further question, comments? All those in favor of the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We will, before we break, can we go into closed and then come back? Yeah, okay, so,
Motion for that.
yeah, can I get a motion to,
No.
no?
Okay, council move item 9.1 to proceed item 5.4 and remainder items be considered following the closed session.
Move to amend the agenda.
Sorry?
Move to amend the agenda.
Can I get a motion moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by?
It was moved by Counselor Youssef, but I will second it.
No. Okay, moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Schiller. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Let's break for lunch and we'll be back at 1:30. Thank you.
Hang on.
Hang on, what?
Yeah, no.
Will we either need to, let's leave the notice and go into closed and then adjourn to closed. Okay, we gotta. Hold on, guys. Everybody else on this?
Okay, we amended the agenda. Can I get a motion to go to close? Moved by Councillor Carrera, seconded by Councillor Doze. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
1:30 back.
1:30 back.
I will start and then Daryl is gonna go through a very short to finish 4 or 5 presentation for you, just to give you some important background information. So we're here to discuss and review the city's town center parking policies of city-owned lots. This was triggered by council's discussions around making downtown vibrant, accessible, and supportive of festivals and events, both those that we run as a city and the groups in which we support. As well as supporting local businesses through engaged and healthy community lens. Looking to see, we want to try and look at ways that parking will keep people here to stay, play, and enjoy versus really focusing on their parking parameters. So that's what we're here to discuss today, and Daryl is going to give you a little bit of insight to help with the discussion points.
That sounds reasonable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sedalia. Yes, it was a comprehensive report. It actually started out about 5,000 words, and then I was told to condense it down. So you have what you have, and hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming. Back to an earlier comment. Yes, I am a self-avowed parking geek, so I do have a bit of a passion for this. I get presented about 10 different reports to council over the years. This is my Bible. This is The High Cost of Free Parking, written by Donald Shoup, who Mark is quite familiar with. This.
UVic, right?
No, US.
Oh, was it UVic?
UVic for a while, yeah. But originally out of the US. Basically uses this to guide municipalities, cities all across North America. It is an awesome resource if you're like having trouble sleeping at night. I can loan it out. In reality, actually, no, there are some really good case studies in it. I do have a copy here if anybody ever wants to borrow it. So background. I do have a presentation, Claudia.
Yep.
Where's it at?
Get your presentation up right now. Thanks.
So I'll blow through that as quickly as I can.
There's your presentation.
No.
Called a recommendation.
Seconds.
while they're doing that, I'll just run through the background context. It's really.
Yeah, you're up
there we
there.
go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so background context, again, in 2008, agency called Fund, wrote a fairly comprehensive report that informed us on best practices, managing on-street parking rates. It's dated admittedly, but a lot of the foundational work that was done there still apply. It is a good reference point as we move forward. February 2020, I presented a report. We went through and we updated all the rates and the limits and the policies for the city's underground and Edge Street lots. And at that time, we also started chatting about the commuter lot. April, we had council approval to proceed with the lease for the commuter lot. April of 2022, Mr. Halpin presented to council a town center parking strategy where we updated public parking inventory, and again got direction to renew the lease for the commuter lot. Briefly, when we look at parking formats, we have 3 in Maple Ridge. We don't really have any commercial lots in Maple Ridge. There's simply not demand for that. We've got on-street parking, which is typically time duration or metered parking. In Maple Ridge, we do not have any metered parking at this point. We have off-street residential commercial, which is again governed by the bylaw. So again, whether there's a residential development or commercial, they are dictated how many spaces they're required under the bylaw. And we have off-street municipal, which is city-owned lots as well. So first up, we've got on-street parking. We have in the city of Maple Ridge in our town center approximately 1,500 free on-street parking spaces in the town center area. These time restrictions range anywhere from unlimited on the streets to 1 to 2 hours, which are the sort of more popular time frames. Staff from engineering, transportation, economic development, and property work with local businesses, stratas, the BIA, the chamber, all in hopes of facilitating individual and area needs to make it work better for the community at large. Bylaws does all the enforcement is related to parking. What works really well for bylaws is consistency in rates, in policies, both for staff in terms of avoiding conflicts, but also for the visitors and guests that come to the town. And again, we do run into conflicts on occasion where you'll have somebody that's come on a weekend, the first hour is free, and then they come midweek and they thought the first hour was free, and then they get issued a ticket, and it's a bit challenging at times. So consistency works really well for bylaws, and it works really well for staff or for customers and visitors to the town. It's a little hard to see, unfortunately, with the glare, but you can see here, this is town center, and these are all the areas. These all in green are the 2-hour zones, and then all these blue are 1-hour zones. And again, town center, Memorial Peace Park are in the middle. You can see the bulk of them, of all the free 1 to 2-hour spots, are located pretty close to town center. You can go north 1 block and you've got Brown Avenue where it's unlimited free all day parking. So again, a lot of inventory of free short-term parking. Off-street parking. Again, we talked about that earlier, again, regulated by the bylaw. I'm not gonna spend any time on this. Again, council decides where that's going. We talked about Vancouver with them eliminating minimum uses in their all land uses. That's going to be, I think, kind of interesting to see how that develops. Pressures on their street parking and other options that they do have available. Thirdly, we have off-street municipal parking. So the city has 8 lots that we own, just under 900 parking spaces. 4 of those lots are owned by the city, but managed by the Downtown Parking Society. We acquired those lots back in the 1980s. It was part of an incentive to the precursor to the BIA to be able to pull traffic off.
Sorry, Tara.
I know exactly where you're going with that.
I'm gonna just keep it to myself.
Yeah, perfect. And so we continue to own them. They're continued to be managed by the Downtown Parking Society. The objective of that was to pull employees and owners, business owners off the street, and so that it was more partly available for visitors and guests and retail users. So we've got 3 that we own and manage, which are the Maple Ridge Business Center, the underground there, the Yed Street lot, commuter lot, and as well a little lot out there that faces Dewey Trunk. The DPS lots, they operate typically at full or near capacity. And yes, 900 sounds like a lot, but once we actually apply all the encumbrances to them, that number actually shrinks quite a bit. So the 3 lots we own, the Maple Ridge Underground lot, which again, its primary focus is leasehold tenants of the MRBC. It also serves employee and public parking for City Hall, the Yak, the Leisure Center, the library, Memorial Peace Park, other retail businesses. Again, it's heavily used Monday to Friday with a lot of demands on it. Again, anybody that's attended or tried to park Monday to Friday when there's a dance recital at the Yak knows the pressures that there. We've got the Edge Street lot, which again serves primarily the RCMP detachments, members of their staff, City Hall employees, general public. This lot fills up really quick, usually by early morning. We typically are hands off on this lot. Simply, we don't entertain any incremental uses of this lot simply because we do not ever want to be in a position where we're compromising our CMP operations. Commuter lot, serves commuters using the adjacent TransLink service as well. We have used it where there is capacity, a portion of it for to support film. And you can see from this map where all these lots are indicated in yellow. And again, what this shows is we do actually have pretty good geographic coverage for paid lots in the downtown area. Here are our encumbrances. So when you look at the Edge Street lot and the Maple Ridge underground lot, when we apply a full subscription, so all the reservations, all the leasehold spaces, all the parking passes, everything like that, for both the Edge Street and the Maple Ridge underground, we end up with 5 for the Edge Street lot in terms of extra capacity and 81 for the underground lot. So a total of 86 between the 2, which really, again, back to the dance recital example, that goes pretty quickly, and parking in the underground becomes pretty much a blood sport after that point. The good part, or the good thing to know, is that Maple Ridge has a flat, walkable, compact downtown. And so when you use the average walking distance or walking speed of the average male, or the average adult, sorry, not average male, the average adult is about 1.3 meters per second. So from Memorial Peace Park, you can see you can fan out, and most of the blue and the green spaces that we talk about are all within a 2 to 5 minute walk from Memorial Peace Park. If you wanted to walk to the outskirts of the downtown core from Memorial Peace Park, you're under 10 minutes to get there. So again, we are blessed with this, again, a walkable flat town. When we look at towns like Westminster, it becomes much more problematic when you're trying to densify your downtown and try to get that walkability scored up. Parking rates, commuter lots, and again, these rates have been in place since 2020. $1 per hour, $4 per day, $60 per month. And again, they are designed to appeal to parkers and commuters and make it reasonable so that they will actually encourage use. Again, registration through license plate and enforcement through bylaws, and payments managed through the in-park meter as well. Parking rates between the underground and the Edge Street lot are harmonized. So Monday to Friday, they're $1 per hour from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There's no pre-hour. There is a $3 evening rate from 6 to 11 to support the ACT and other evening events downtown. Saturday, Sunday, staff holidays, 1 hour in the underground and the Edge Street is free. License plate registration is still required. Additional hours are $1, and the daily rate is $4 on the weekends. We do not publicize this typically, but statutory holidays under our bylaw for any city lot, whether it be street or paid, are exempted from parking fees. If we reopen that bylaw, I personally will be looking at that and looking to do an exemption of our paid lots. And the reason why is because when a statutory holiday falls on a Monday to Friday, that has the potential to create challenges with our legal tenants who have a reserve space. It also has tremendous potential to create challenges with the RCMP lot if that lot was to be overwhelmed by the pre-users of it. So it's a little glitch in the bylaw that I think we still need to adjust if we ever do open that up in the future. So concluding, again, town center is flat, it's compact, it's walkable. We believe it's well serviced with a wide range of short, medium, and long-term free and paid parking options and fair and equitable parking, public parking rates. The existing public parking policies for both on-street and city-owned lots function well. We have an appropriate turnover of spots and allow for consistency in enforcement as well. The parking policies and rates work best, as we talked about earlier, for all stakeholders, and we're talking enforcement and we're talking visitors, and there's day-to-day consistency in the rates and the policies. And staff from all departments, we work actually pretty harmoniously and work pretty good to manage on-street parking as per industry best practices. So again, we have all the experts in the room, and I would certainly welcome questions or comments on the report.
Thank you very much, sir, and it's open to questions and comments, please. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and report. Just real quick, when we're looking at our 1,500 free parking spots, have we considered possibly going out to the public to see what appetite they would have for, rather than having 1 or 2 hour limits, but have it metered so they can utilize it? Because I've personally come across a few business owners, operators, employees in the downtown area who have said, I'd rather park for 4 or 5 hours and pay for those 4 or 5 hours than have to move my car every hour or every 2 hours, or have to incur a parking violation ticket because I was busy with a customer, be it hairdresser or otherwise, and ended up staying longer than the time limit. So that would be one piece. And then the other one is, again, for those 1,500 free parking spots, have we done any examination research of what the revenue structure would look like if we were to match other municipalities that have paid parking throughout their municipality? And there's nothing that says we can't do the same thing that we're doing with the underground lot, where the first hour is free. And then after that, if you'd like to stay, then you can extend that and pay for ultimately the space that you're using rather than the current model. And of course, I would very much like to look into fixing that glitch, as you mentioned, where on statutory days, it's kind of a free for all.
Thank you, Councillor, through the chair to Councillor Youssef. That would fall under Mark's bailiwick in terms of research. I know that he's looked at it. I personally am an advocate because, again, for all the reasons you've outlined. I mean, again, the paradigm, Maple Ridge is sort of still a little bit in its infancy as related to paid parking. Yeah, again, anybody that's gone downtown, we're pretty happy to find a spot that's probably 20 minutes away. Like hypothetically, we're going to QE Theater to see Seinfeld in January. We're pretty happy to find a spot that's 20 minutes away from the theater for $30 that we have to self-park and walk in the rain to get there and think we've won a lottery. One of my other colleagues who's sitting across from me paid $50 to park for Cirque du Soleil. So $1 for an extra hour and things like that. We will be moving in that direction. I think it's inevitable. Port Moody's just introduced. Again, when you look at their shoot, it encourages turnover. You get actually better subscription of visitors and guests to the area.
All right, Port Moody, interesting example. They hit a threshold where they did quite a few blocks. If you look at it, you need to have that before you go towards a pay structure. The challenge with it is, will we make any money? Probably not, quite honestly. The high cost, there's an economy of scale. You'd have to hit a set threshold to cover your operating costs. What we do now is we do occupancy scans. So our staff are walking the streets and we're scanning to see what the occupancy rate is per block base to determine if we need to make any changes to curbside parking regs. We did one in December when it was high Christmas season. We followed that up with another one in the spring. We also work with local businesses quite a bit, like we said, localized concerns. What we've found is that when parking is an issue or a challenge, it's usually related to 1 or 2 businesses. So we're available 5 days a week, and that's really the clear, that for anything to take away from council, if you have a concern from the business, tell them to give us a call. We will make the time, we will walk out and visit them. We've been working recently with Naomi from Town and Country. Several times we've had discussions with her. We've made some changes to those to regulations around there. We have a coordinated approach with bylaws to help enforce the regulations there. We've made changes to several stratas within the town center as well. So one business will come in with a concern. We ask them to go to the strata, have a letter from your strata, send it to staff. Then we'll work directly with that strata to make the changes, because it collectively impacts the entire building. It's not just in front of that one business. That's been really effective. So we will monitor those occupancy rates. And when it gets to a point where we're saying, hey, this is saturated and there's no longer access to business, and that's primarily what we're trying to support, then we need to employ a pay structure. We don't see that we're at this point right now. What Daryl mentioned earlier too is we have the fortunate opportunity of a really flat town center. So most employees are parking up Brown Street, quite honestly. They're walking a block or two, and they're fine. And if they're deciding to park in a 2-hour zone, we have a great capable bylaw team to help us out with that as well. So it usually works quite well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And my second point through you, Mr. Chair, is, excuse me, when we're looking at even our rates for the paid parking, $1 an hour and then $4 per day, I think it warrants a revisit as to the costs and the charges that we're charging for the parking costs. It's quite affordable, I understand, and it's meant to encourage people to come downtown and utilize those spots. But are we covering our operating costs? Are we, as the municipality, making any money on parking, or is it just a nominal fee that's meant to serve a purpose? I would be. I'm not gonna try to guess, so.
If you, through the chair, Councillor Youssef, if you look at the page 8 of the report, you'll see there's the revenue generation for 2023. So on the commuter lot and the 226th Street, so that's the park and ride, and then the Edge Street and the service lot, you'll see, yes, we did net out about just under $150,000 parking revenues in 2023. So they are a profitable venture. Again, it becomes one of those, you're providing a service. I mean, we've never seen any correlation between event attendance and the parking rates. Like people, we've never seen any, or we've never actually undertaken a study that would suggest that people are not coming downtown because it costs them $1 to park. You know, so there's no hard data that we can rely on. It would be something we might want to look at in the future to be able to sort of petition, survey some of the events, but the rates. Again, we've tried to be competitive because we don't want it to be a deterrent, but at the same time, we are very affordable rates right now.
That's understandable, and it's great that we are very affordable and profitable in the same breath, so.
Yeah. And again, it's back to Mr. Halpin's comment, we've got a wide range. So if somebody has the ability to walk the block and park for free all day, that option's available. If they want to park for 2 hours for free, that's available. If they want to pay and spend all day down here on a Saturday, it's $4.
If I could add to the context of the conversation, that we have had groups request the city consider free parking to support festivals and events in our main lots. So and we currently have a request on the table. So just want to make sure we're adding to the conversation and not getting too lost in revenue, that looking to support festivals, events, and having people play, stay all day, that these requests are coming from groups. So I just want to make sure that we can have that conversation as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Perez, please.
Thank you. This is a fun conversation at the end of the day. I have a couple of questions on this, because this is the first time it's come to me. I know Councillor Youssef and Councillor Duvick, obviously, judging on the timeline, I've had lots of conversations on this. Can someone explain to me what the Downtown Parking Society is, what they do, how they're managed? I'm not entirely sure what it is.
you through the chair of council
And I-
affairs. The Downtown Parking Society was, and again, my understanding, it was before my time, it was 1980s. It was a coalition of a number of the business leaders in the downtown core, and they approached council at the time and the city, and they had come up with what they had presented was the city acquire lots that they would manage. And again, the objective was to free up the streets to be able to encourage more visitors and guests, because again, that was sort of the challenge at that time. And so the city put up the money, and through a levy through all the downtown businesses, that's how the lots were financed through a taxation. So all the businesses paid a levy. That eventually, when those were paid off, that morphed into what is now the Downtown Business Improvement Association.
So it's an association, they still manage the lots?
They do.
Do we, like, is it a society, they have a board of directors?
They do.
Do at some point, if we could get some information on who sits on the board, and they manage it, so do they take the money that we collect? I'm just trying to figure out the financial, what they do.
Thank you. And yes, so they manage all the bookings. So again, they're done on a monthly basis. So when somebody wants to rent a space, if they contact the city or they contact me, I direct them to their head of operations. And again, it's a very small operations set of operations, but so they will contact and they will reach out and they will put the contract in place for the time. They handle all the billing, all the invoicing, and then at the end of the year, they reconcile. We request and they provide audited financial statements. And then if there's residuals, those get turned over.
So it's like monthly parking, and when if any film or anything want to rent a neighbor lots, they manage all that, and then they take some, no. so
Only
they-
the 4 lots that they manage,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, all right, I'm just trying to figure out what is their purpose and what it exactly do. Okay, the other question I have is there why is this one out here on the surface free and downtown isn't? Because I gotta tell you, this being free is where I almost get into an accident almost time I'm turning it, because it's crazy. Like, I know it's an hour max, but it's free.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what the decision was between that.
Again, through the chair to Councillor Krebs, it is an open lot. So when, again, there is a value in the underground in terms of covered, safe, secure parking. Not that that's not safe or secure, but again, when we put in, we've got the retail tenants out front, and it's simply a service for them. It is obviously time restricted to an hour, and you're right, it does turn over quite rapidly, and it seems to be a good balance. Especially now that we've freed up the spaces that ICBC was using for the driver training.
I just find, just during the week, it's quite dangerous. Because people go there and they're circling around and people are blocking as you're trying to turn left to get into the underground, so I was just curious about that.
It is a busy option.
Yeah, have we, how many like free accessible spots do we have close to the recreation center?
Excellent question. In the underground, we
They're not free
are,
in the underground though.
we have an excessive accessible spaces in the underground, but you're correct, they are free.
They're not
I'll turn it over to Mark. I'm not sure what we've got in terms of street parking. I know we've got drop-off zones in both areas, and maybe Celia or Valerie could talk to that.
We do have the ones outside of the leisure center, as well as that little gravel, I call it pit. So there are some free spots there.
Well, I will expand on that. So we did expand our accessible parking spaces underground. They are at the same charge as any other parker. There are spots just before the downtown, the ring road, but those are for over height accessible parking. So you have to be an over height vehicle and accessible, and those ones are free.
Okay. Because it is a concern for me. I mean, we've had lots of conversations today around downtown versus Maple Ridge. Downtown is not the same as Maple Ridge, so I think it's an unfair comparison. And also when you say that people are able to walk, well, that's right. There's a lot of us that are able to walk. There's a whole portion of us that are not able to walk, including our seniors. and so I wanna just make sure like that's a key priority for me, is that we have accessible parking spots that are free for folks so they can attend. Do we have any feedback? I'm not so concerned about the weekday stuff. I get how we put the charge in because it's really to manage the lot use downstairs. And so I don't love that we lost the 1 hour free, especially for those that are attending swim lessons or going to the gym, like people who are trying to be active or engaging their children. But I get the daytime thing to move people around. So my focus is more on the weekends. Because we are hearing, you know, we do want to get people downtown. We do want them staying and enjoying our festivals. And we are hearing from more and more groups. And quite honestly, I heard a lot during the last 4 days about volunteers who spent a lot of time volunteering for this community who were paying for parking for 5 days. And I don't want to have any barriers in place of people actually volunteering because there's so few people that do that. But do we have any feedback from business around weekend parking? Because I have heard anecdotally from a lot of folks that people aren't attending their businesses because of the paid parking, but I don't know if we have any data on that or we've heard anything.
Only anecdotal, not a part of this report, you're all helping report over here.
Yeah, we haven't, through the chair, we haven't heard anything from businesses having concerns on weekends. But they're free to call and we'll work with them.
Yeah, I mean, that would be concern. I know this is just for discussion. There's no resolutions on this, but I'll just put my pieces on the table. So I would like us to consider and to look at a couple of things. One is to look at expanding whatever we have on the weekend, whether that's 4 hours free or weekends free, to encourage people to come downtown. Part of our strategic plan is to encourage people to come downtown. It's to attend our festivals. It's to come and stay and be with us. We want to really, we don't have to encourage people to go to downtown Vancouver. We still have to encourage people to come to downtown Maple Ridge and go to our businesses. The other piece that's important to me is, as we look at this, is the free accessibility spots. It's a real priority for me to make sure that our spaces, in particular, our recreation center, it's huge for me that our people who are bringing their kids to swim lessons, people who are going to the gym, people that are using our pool, people that are going to classes or whatever, and they're coming to have a healthy lifestyle. I want to make sure it's accessible and easy and it's not a barrier to them. And then the other thing, if we can think about it as we go forward, is, you know, many times people have come up to me and they don't have a credit card and they can't pay for parking. And I know that there's one machine downstairs that apparently takes cash, but no one can ever find it. And I know that we're moving towards a credit card world, but we need to keep in mind that so many people do not have credit cards, including children, like my teens, when they can drive, but they don't have credit cards because they're not legal yet. I've run into elders from First Nations that didn't have credit cards and couldn't pay for parking. So these are concerns from that.
Thank you for that. We do have, you're correct, the 1 meter in the downtown, in the underground that does accept cash, that we've got close to the leisure center for that reason. We can certainly look at the signage to improve that. We're actually upgrading that meter. And it was one of those, well, you can go with straight credit card. And we said, no, we need at least one to respect the fact that not everybody does carry a credit card. I personally, again, find it frustrating. I'll use my downtown example. I go and I pull out and it's like pay by phone. And it's like the 27 different, like every lot has a different pay by phone provider. I've got probably 10 apps on my phone, and the one I'm going to apparently has not that. Now I need on mobile. It's like, so yeah, it is going that way. We do have that ability downstairs, but we're also cognizant of the fact that yes, cash, there are still a segment of the marketplace that does use cash. So.
And I just have one other question on table 4, because I want to make sure I understand it correctly. So it says total net revenue, free after 5, free parking on weekends, and free weekend. Is that the, well, actually, I guess it would be the 8 months. It's not the, so 14,000 would be sort of a 12-month impact. Yes. This is only for the first 8 months. So if we were to do free weekends, it's a $10,000 cost. And I also understand the book you're talking about. I get there's other costs. I get it. So I'm trying to find a balance here to make sure the community is supported as well. And so that is 10,000 is the annual, or sorry, 8 months?
Yeah, that was over the 8 month period, so that was looking at weekend stats and statutory holidays from that time period. The one stat that's kind of null is the third one there, because they didn't really actually have a reference point when business services pulled it, so it sort of comes up with a $210 loss, but there's nothing to measure it against. But you're correct, the 10,000 is the total that would be lost if we were to do free for that.
And through the chair, I know it's past 5, so I'll be quick. 119 Selkirk and it always hits me, Macintosh also have accessible parking spaces available on each end of the street. They are free and available to all users. Well, not available to all users.
Macintosh and
And Selkirk.
to look at where it is.
Yeah, they're kind of at the ends, like there's a bit of angled parking there, so there's close to City Hall, so you can kind of get, or. So those
They're
are
on the
available.
224th Street side of,
Exactly.
so like the east side.
Yeah. And they're also on the 223rd Street has some as well, so we bookend that street. with accessible
But
parking
you still
spaces.
have to travel to get to the rec center or the Act Arts Center.
Yeah, I understand, yes, but for events, they are quite utilized, so that's great. Plus we have the additional spaces that Valerie was mentioning.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So this one is for just discussion only. There's no resolution on this. Am I correct?
That's right.
So
So
any more?
can I just ask, what do we want to do with this going forward? It's been presented to us for update. Do we need it to come back to us? Do we?
It's just for information for us to be aware of what is happening. Am I correct?
Do they-
So the purpose of today's workshop was to bring council up to speed on town center parking policies and the rates, have a conversation on where council would like to go with this. So this informs staff's work plan if you want this to come forward. It sounds like that there's some appetite from council to explore some options to support on weekends and support business, which requires further investigation. Because this is regulated by bylaw, staff are gonna need to go away, come back with a set of recommendations for council as well as potential amendments to a bylaw based on that feedback. So I think it'd be helpful before we convene this, Mr. Chair, is that council's maybe just a little more direct on some of those changes you'd like to see incorporated into an amended bylaw, into staff work plan, so that they can bring this back to you when you get back from break in September.
Okay.
I mean, I would like it to come back to us, specifically looking at weekends free with some further information about business impact. And information from business.
Are we gonna raise this as a motion?
No, I don't need a motion. We just need the conversation. So staff are very clear.
Yeah, go on.
Since I'm being invited to share thoughts, as long as we're using this book as a guiding document, then I'm just like, great. Because one thing I've learned about parking is it is a hot topic and it represents so many
It's
things.
simple, but it's so complex at the same time.
It really
One
is
little
amazing.
move here, effect, yes, it's quite fascinating.
It really is, and as was rightly pointed out to me just an hour ago, when you tinker with one part over here, there's impacts over there, so it's very hard to look at these things in isolation. I think Councillor Carras has raised some great points about accessibility. I think we need to take care of those who have valid mobility challenges, and we need to encourage those without mobility challenges to shift their thinking a little bit. And as Councillor Youssef raised, that we allocate so much space to parking and there's value in that and it's that value has to be reflected somehow. The biggest piece for me is that we're like tracking this so carefully and looking at what the occupancy is, because I just my limited understanding, I know that that's very key. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Youssef, I know you did mention some people talking to you about parking, and do you want to incorporate that into what staff will take away?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair. I believe my comments were rather clear around where I would like to see some adjustments. Would you like me to repeat or?
No, that's good.
I don't like repeating myself, and I don't think you want to hear my voice any more than you have to.
So if we have captured everything you said about this one, I think we move to the next item on the agenda. Sorry.
Thank you.
That's what I was asking, but then there's gonna be a motion on it.
Move.
Okay, moved and seconded by Councillor. Okay, those who, sorry, yes, raise your hand, those who agree, raise your hand.
It's always hard when you get thrown in the middle.
That's fine. So the last item on the agenda is 5.5. UBC and subject. We're starting to us on this.
The item in front of council is a UBCM survey that's been sent to the corporation looking for feedback on provincial consultation on treaty and non-treaty agreements. We confirmed because we were kind of hoping that UBCM was opening it up to multiple responses. We could send you the link. Unfortunately, Katarina did the right thing and reached out, and UBCM said, no, we'd like one consolidated voice per agency. So what we wanted to just have a discussion with council is how would you like staff to respond back to the survey on behalf of the city of Maple Ridge and incorporate your feedback into that piece. So with that, I'll hand over to Katarina.
Okay, Scott summarized it pretty well. You've all seen the report, so you'll see in the discussion section just sort of staff insights in terms of what our interactions have been to date with the province in terms of any engagement on treaty or non-treaty agreements, which has been virtually none, zero. Interestingly, the attachment in the UBCM MOU, which has been a long-standing agreement that gets renewed between the province and UBCM, goes into quite a bit of detail in terms of what the province should be doing when they, in order to engage appropriately with municipalities in terms of any impacts, right? So you don't want to be blindsided, you want to understand what's going on with our First Nations partners and what the impacts are for us as a municipality, including just quickly highlight, limited capacity and resources, for example, to meet provincial requirements. So for emergency management, for example, and archaeological cultural preservation, those are a couple of issues that come to mind. So with that, the questions of the survey were in the attachment. And so at this point, we'd just like to turn it over to council to sort of get your collective perspective on answering those questions, and I'll just take notes and then amalgamate them for everybody.
Thanks. I saw this because it came out in UBCM email and they routinely ask us for stuff. And I always think that as an organization, we should be giving our input into UBCM or FCM whenever we can, because they are our advocacy groups. And quite honestly, they have a larger voice than we can ever do. So I think we should always participate in these surveys as an organization. My pieces on this one would be, I didn't know this existed until it came out. And mostly because the government isn't consulting with us. And not that they're necessarily consulting, but I think the MU says they're supposed to ask us our thoughts on things, and there's a two-way street there. And so much of the land use that we do all the land use pieces, and some of it relies on what's happening with those negotiations that they never heard of it, we don't get any information, and the province needs to engage us. Essentially, that's my feedback. It's important.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, just along similar lines, my sense is just sort of that, this engagement with First Nations is a priority, or has been for this provincial government. And my sense is just sort of like the requirements keep going up, but that's not matched by any provision of resources or implementation. I can think of a few situations where municipalities have really struggled not only to understand what's going on, but even what their role is, in things that are happening in their community. And so I think the provincial government will need to do more to clarify that for local governments.
Thank you very much. Any more comments from anybody? Okay. We look at what we have on the board by way of prayer.
I'll move the first one.
Yes, second that. Any second that? Okay. Those for it, say yes. Against, oh, it's unanimously carried, sorry. Yeah, okay. So it's either or. So since we have taken the first one, the second one is no longer applicable, correct? Correct. Yeah. Number 6, correspondence, Madam Clerk. Oh.
Good job, Jose.
Where's
That was
number nine?
terrific.
Adjourn.
It's
Adjourn. Okay.
the easy one.
I've been advised that we're going to number 9, item number 9, which is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, well done.
You see, I ran your meeting today from beginning to the end.
Yes.
I did it.
And yes, yes.
See you in a minute.
Okay.